anyhow, welcome to Ask Earl Anything, number 28. And today's episode, we've got a few questions, shout out, a couple other things. Who knows? I got some ideas of cooking right now, so let's get started. So, first off, had a whole day away from the office, so I've been out in training class. So this evening I'm doing this between my lesson, my class, getting home, and my lesson. So I'm gonna have a little sip of water here. All right. Couple things. Your questions make the show. All right. Now I'm thinking of a few things. I'm thinking of doing a couple things to this show. And one of the things I might like to try, so I don't know who's up for it, but I might like to try this. I've been thinking about this. If somebody here, some of my guys who love to ask questions all the time, would actually go on camera and ask a question on camera and post it to YouTube. YouTube is unlisted where I can actually download it or send it to me. And I could put your face in the question, asking me the question for the show. So think about that. I don't think I'll do a whole show of this, but it really would depend on response. But if I got 5 this week, if 5 people sent me questions that way, I would definitely answer them over the next month, maybe 2 at a time or whatever. So that's one thing. Another thing I'm thinking about is doing a live show. It won't be Ask Earl Anything, but it'll be something like interviewing another drummer or having a discussion with somebody on a specific topic. Something where I could use the OBS software and FaceTime or Skype and really try to pull something off. So I've got some thoughts on that. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, what you think would be cool. I'm watching Jeff Holden try this experiment right now. He's doing a great job of it. He's definitely got a couple little flaws in there that he's working on. And I see those flaws and I'm going, wow, those look like rabbit holes that are pretty scary to go down. It's one thing to set up a camera and talk to it. It's another thing to have a camera pointed at you and you've got to stay engaged while your right brain, left brain's going on. Okay? So that's one of the tough things about that. So anyhow, before I get on with the show, I've got one other amazing shout out that I want to do. And I want to shout out to Bill Morehouse. And Bill Morehouse last week, he pretty much sent me a Facebook message and he posted something to my Facebook page. And it was an exercise that I created during Ask Earl Anything number 26, and it was the exercise that a friend of mine told me about, Steve Dupree, where you would actually set up the clicks for like 8 bars, then drop out for 8 bars and see if you can lock into a groove. He took the exercise, he was doing 2-bar grooves, and he was working on certain patterns out of a book, and he was using that concept of 2 bars on click, 2 bars off click. And he shared it with me, and he shared it with a couple other guys on Facebook, and I have to tell you, I was blown away that he actually shouted out to me on Facebook that way and in this video. And if I knew how to download off of Facebook the video, I would actually show it to you. That's the kind of thing I want to get into being able to do, is to share some of the cool people that share things with me. But Bill Morehouse, check his channel out. He's a great player. He's a learner. He's constantly learning. He's constantly trying things. He's trying to continue to grow. So you could tell that that's what he focuses on. He doesn't pick the easy covers for the quick likes. He actually does some more difficult covers. He shares some of his journey and his lessons and where he's going with his music. But check out Bill Morehouse's channel. If you're not a friend, check him out. He is definitely worth checking out. So I was really honored by his shout out video I saw last week, and I thought it was just so cool. So, all right, so let's get started with the show, and I'm gonna start from the back to the front today. First question comes from 2112 Drums, and 2112 Drums says, what is the biggest bass drum you have? The biggest bass drum I have currently is a 14 by 22 inch kick drum. And probably, if you can see into the other room, it's that drum over there with the big 12-inch hole in the center. And it is a Gretsch bass drum. It's got Gretsch feet on it. It's been recovered. It was stripped of its pearl. I've got maple hoops on it. And I've got Ludwig lugs on it because my friend who gave me the drum, and it was a give, it was part of a deal we did, he gave me the drum. He had done some funky stuff with some mismatched pearl and Gretsch hardware. So I had some Ludwig hardware on a strip bass drum that was just garbage, completely warped. And what I did was I put all that Ludwig hardware on the drum because it fit the hole pattern for the Gretsch. The large Gretsch lug and the large Ludwig lug are the exact same size. So that drum, it looks like a Ludwig drum, but it's actually a Gretsch. Sounds like a Gretsch. It's got that fat punch. I love playing that drum, and I do use it. I've used it in covers. I've used it with the Concert Tom kit. It's a great drum. Now, the largest bass drum I've ever played and owned was a 24, 14 by 24. It was a Marine Pearl Ludwig. I had that back in the 90s, and I've told the story about that a few times here. So, but that's my largest bass drum. My smallest bass drum, 14 by 18. Matter of fact, all my bass drums are 14 by. That is the old standard size drums from the 70s and 80s. Well, actually, the 80s started to change. Probably late 70s. Carmen Appice, matter of fact, let me just give you the bass drum depth concept here. I believe Carmen Appice was one of the main proponents of it to start with. And John Bonham might have been part of it too. But those guys were buds, okay? And Carmine was looking for something a little bit deeper than a 14. He eventually got the Ludwig Drum Company to build him a 16 by 24 kick drum, or 16 by 26 kick drum. And I think Bonham had a couple of those too that were built specially for him. But prior to Carmen Appice, the standard depth size was 14 by 28, 14 by 26, 14 by 20, 14 by 18, 14 by 22. Since that time, the end of the 70s pretty much, the power bass drum thing has just gotten out of control. Matter of fact, there was a guy down here at Resurrection Drums, I think his name was Bob Becker. I'm actually friends with him on Facebook because a friend of mine, Steve Cruz, was friends with him back in the day of the Resurrection Drums. And Bob Becker owned Resurrection Drums. He used to have these drums in the Modern Drummer ads in the 80s. They were called Kill on Command. And they had these huge, super long bass drums, okay? Then you start seeing them popping up everywhere. So the biggest bass drum I've ever played, I think, was with the long bass drum was a 22 by 18. And it was a DMR 22 by 18. I had it in the studio for a while. My friend Dan built it. It was green colored. It was like kind of this lime green. I didn't really dig the color of it, but it sounded awesome. So I've played some big deep bass drums, but my preferred size is 22, is about as big as I'd want to go right now. Even though I almost had a deal on a 26. I think I told that story not too long ago. So that's the answer to that one, 2112. Thank you for the question. The next question comes from Jay Klein. Jay Klein said, what is the longest stretch of time you've gone without playing drums? Days, weeks, months, years? Okay. Well, I can tell you I've never gone years without playing drums. I don't think I've ever even gone months without playing drums, or even a month without playing drums. Probably the longest amount of time I've ever stopped playing drums would probably be a 2-week period. That's probably about it. When I went to Europe, well, actually, I went to Europe a couple years ago. And while I went to Italy actually, and when I went to Italy, you guys all saw and you guys that watched the Italy video, you guys will remember that I played with a street band. So I actually played drums on that trip, which was kind of nice. Even most of my vacations, I usually stop at a drum shop and sit down and play some drums at a drum shop if I can get away with it. But I would say 2 weeks. I remember doing a couple business trips, but they were in California back in the 90s where I was 13 days away, 14 days away. Well, I was 13 days away, as the longest I was ever away from home on a business trip, continuous. and I had a weekend away. But whenever I had those weekends away, you know where I would go? I'd go to drum shops. And that's how I found the drum shops in California. Starving Musician. There's a drum shop in San Rafael, a vintage drum shop there that I've gone to a couple times, a Drummer's Tradition it's called. There was a place called Lemon Percussion back in San Jose back in that day. So whenever I'm on a business trip, I go to drum shops. That's one of my favorite things to do. Forks Drum Shop. In Nashville, I always stop at when I go there. If I'm on vacation in New York City, I'll stop at the drum shops in New York City. So it's one of the things I like to do. I like to visit drum shops. I was in Atlanta at a wedding, my friend Tyler's wedding, and before I went to the wedding, I stopped off at the Atlanta Percussion, I think it was called at the time. I'm not sure that's there either anymore. So, but I try to hit drum shops when I'm in a city. That's one of my favorite things to do. And usually if I go to a drum shop, I'm going to sit down for a couple minutes and play. So, but I haven't, it's not very long. Now, I do bring a practice pad with me on the road usually, but not religiously. And I like to have a pair of sticks and a pair of brushes when I'm on the road so I can sit and play brushes. I'll play brushes on a newspaper or on a tabletop. And I like having a practice pad where I can practice some rudiments if I want to. That's pretty much what I do. But yeah, I haven't missed playing drums. That's not my thing, Jay. I play a lot. Practicing and playing are two different things, okay? One of the things I hope you guys realize is when I do a lot of my drum covers, I'm actually practicing them as I'm recording them. I don't spend time where I practice and work out parts. I like to play in the moment. So I do a lot of what they call practice playing. I'll play to learn a song. I'll play to work on soloing. But I don't sit there and do rudiments that often. But if I have nothing to do in a hotel room, sometimes I'll pull a pad out and play. And I'll work on doubles, triples, paradiddles, pull out stick control or something. I wish I did it more often. And I wish I had the time to do it, to be honest. But that's the answer, Jay. Great question, as usual. The next question comes from Eric Dewey's Drums. And Eric says, I want to get to the question area. All right, here's the question for the next episode. How often do you replace your batter heads and resonant heads? I like to think I can replace my batters 2 times for each time I replace the resonant head. Thoughts? All right, now I'm going to be really honest with you guys. I change my batter heads more often than I change the bottom heads. And it's nowhere near 2 times for every 1 time. These resonant heads on these drums are clear ambassadors from 2003. Every time I get ready to buy resonant heads, something else I want comes up. And I hate spending a lot of money. I just put an order into Interstate Music this week, okay? I'm getting a EMAD bass drum head, the calf tone EMAD bass drum head. So I'm looking forward to changing my bass drum vibe a little bit. Right now I've got a white coated ambassador on it. I've got coated emperors. I bought for this kit 10, 12, 13, 14, 16 vintage A's. At least now they're called vintage A coated heads. So they don't have the same vintage A logo on it. So God only knows what that really means. I'm hoping they're still vintage A's because vintage A's have got a 3mm layer and a 7mm layer. I think the 7mm's on the top, the 3mm's on the bottom. So it's kind of like a lighter version of an Emperor. That's what I dig about them. The coated ambassadors have got a single ply. I believe the single ply is 10mm, okay? Emperors, I believe, are 7 and 7. Now, an ambassador may be 7mm. Don't get mad at me if I got that wrong. I really don't study the Remo catalog anymore, okay? But I did study the vintage A's, and the vintage A's have got a 7 and a 3. Probably the ambassadors are 7mm coated. I have ambassadors on my little jazz kit. Emperors are probably 7 and 7 on top of one another. So that's probably the Emperor one. And the vintage A's have got a 7 and a 3 mil, which is kind of like putting a resonant head under a regular ambassador head. So it gives it just a little bit of fatness, and I like the sound of coated heads. So I bought some of those heads, and then I bought some sticks, and I bought a beater for the bass drum because I want to try that big fat Vic Firth beater with the big stick-like thing. I had to try that. And I bought a pair of Vic Firth purple brushes, the purple ones. I've never had a pair of those, so I'm gonna try those out. And by the time that was all done, it was 300 bucks. And it's like, I'm not gonna buy resonant heads. So I wish I would buy the resonant heads, because if I bought resonant heads, I'd put new resonant heads, and then I'd put the clears on the top, the clear ambassadors on the top, and that I would play them for a while, okay? Because I'm definitely not gonna waste a resonant head and just throw it away. It's not gonna happen. I'm gonna use it somewhere to play. But I like my resonant heads to never have real stick marks on it, meaning I don't flip the drum over and play on the resonant head. The resonant head stays virgin, okay? You may see me tap with a stick, but it's like this. It's that tap thing. It's not turn it over and beat the snot out of it. Because I hate when drummers have bottom heads that got stick marks in it and top heads that got stick marks in it. Batter heads, beat the snot out of them, get it. Leave your bottom heads virgin, you know, nice and pure. That's what I try to do. So the answer, Eric, is I really don't change the bottom heads. It's been a long time, so one of these days I will. When I do, I will announce it to you guys. But there are guys that are crazy about this stuff. They have to change them every year. They put dates on them and stuff like that. I don't even do that with my snare heads. But I do know with snare heads, because the way you tighten up snare heads, I tend to change them every 1 or 2 years. I try to. Some of them. When you have 11 snare drums or 10 snare drums, you don't change every one of them. But, and I don't change heads as much as I'd like, because I don't have an endorsement. If I had somebody selling me heads at a decent price, I might do it. But 200 bucks to get a new set of heads, that's a lot of dough. It's a lot of dough for a big drum kit. If you got 2 tom heads, you can change your heads every other week for all that I care. I probably would change them 3-4 times a year probably, and change the bottom heads. But I've got so many toms around here, you know, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 16, 20-inch bass drums, 22-inch bass drums, 18-inch bass drums, another set of 10, 12, 14 on that kit. Then I've got 8, 10, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16 concert toms. Then I got some roto toms, 10, 12, 14. You add that up, I got to spend $500 just to change all the heads in my studio. Forget about the 10 snare drums, that's 10 more 14-inch heads, or actually half or more than half for 14, 2 13s, bottom heads. I'm at 800 bucks in heads. I can spend head money forever, which, as you can see, I am slightly frugal. Even though my wife gave me a present, and in Asheville, North Carolina, she wanted me to get this Happy drum, and I kept hedging towards wanting a new snare drum, and I couldn't find another snare drum after the bell brass fell through my fingertips of a couple weeks ago. My friend Mike Frazano said to me, he said, I was talking to him, he said, go for that bell brass, pay them what they want for it. You know, $675, and I didn't. I let it go. By the way, Mike, just to give you the other side of the story, which I haven't talked to you about since, the guy that bought it for $650, he dumped it back in his lap. So apparently this guy might have been a little hard to work with, and he decided to bail on him. So I just want you to know that it wasn't me. I had a vibe about this guy that I wasn't sure about, so I didn't go for it. But I would love to have had that bell brass. But because I didn't get it, I started searching for other stuff to buy for my birthday, because she wanted to buy me a birthday present. It's coming up. And what happened was I found a Happy drum at a happier price than 500 bucks, and I bought the Happy drum. So the Happy drum will be in a video at some point too. Anyhow, that's a little update on that. All right, the next question comes from Brian Corey. And Brian Corey asks me a question, I think. He says, next week, have you ever gone on a long tour? I had a great privilege of playing Manhattan and Brooklyn twice, then Philadelphia, Baltimore, then up to Boston and Providence. It was so much fun. My band and I had to sleep in a van. Just want to know your experiences touring was like. All right. Now, I'm not an extensive touring guy, but I have done some tours. So I've played on some big stages. Not a lot. I played at this festival called Creation Festival with a band called Water. I've told that story. It was before 30,000 people. We opened for the Newsboys. I met Joe English, the drummer Joe English. But that was not a tour. That was a one-off weekend in Pennsylvania. We never really toured. We played more the local clubs in the Jersey, Philadelphia scene, okay? But I worked with this guy named Mike Dacey, who was a guitar player, who was one of the guys for the Wrecking Crew. And I did go on a couple short tours with him of New York State, and then I did a tour up in Pennsylvania, and then I think I did another short tour of West Virginia, Kentucky. So it was like, I think 2 or 3 weeks of playing out on the road with Mike Dacey. There were probably 5-6 days at a time. We were basically staying in really budget motels, traveling in a van, setting up our gear. Very typical rock and roll stuff. But it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot there. The craziest tour I ever did was with the band Saved by Grace. We had a record that was charting at 27 on the Christian charts. And I've told this story somewhere too, I know. I don't think it was on Ask Earl Anything. In Spokane, Washington. And the craziest thing that happened to me was I had to take vacation time. I took a week of vacation off, so did the keyboard player. And we both had day jobs, so we could only get off for that week. So we both flew from Newark, New Jersey over to Spokane, Washington. And the band, they drove with our equipment a week out to Spokane, Washington, a week in Spokane, Washington, then a week back with our equipment from Spokane, Washington. Now, they've got the majority of the stories, okay, of that trip. Because, I mean, they hit black ice, it was November, they almost totaled the truck, so my drums would have been gone, you know. Thank God he protected my drum kit, you know, I mean, and those guys, nobody got hurt. And it was a tour we made no money on, and it's kind of even comical to think about what we did there. You know, we played 6 shows. I think we came home with $300 in our pocket. The lead singer lost the check at one gig. It was like $200. We had like 5 CDs stolen and 3 or 4 T-shirts or something. Maybe it was the other way around, but you know, it was just one of those trips where we had to go out and do this. We did a CD signing at a Christian bookstore, and nobody showed up. And we were actually promoting it on the radio. And that same week that we were promoting on the radio, Amy Grant was promoting on the radio for her date in Spokane, which was the same week we were there. So everybody was going to Amy's show. They weren't going to Saved by Grace. It was a classic, comical tour. And when all was said and done with it, we came home and played a gig together. And I think we made $500 as a band just for the one gig, and we played 5 songs at home. And that's kind of when I realized that touring with that band was not where it was going to go. So I've done some of those kind of interesting tours, you know, motels, vans, not sleeping in vans, never slept in vans. Because I lived in the Jersey, New York area, there was a lot of opportunities to play. Bigger venues, I guess. So I did some of those. But that's my tour experience. Hope that was a cool story, Brian. Great question, though. Awesome question. All right. Next question comes from Steve Cox Drums. And Steve Cox asked a question. I was going to change all my symbols up for this today, but I'm squeezing this in, my tough week this week. The question was, sorry, I'm curious about something. In your questions about symbols and stuff you mentioned that there really isn't anything you really want at the moment, have you any interest in splash cymbals, China splashes, stacks, effect cymbals? I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in any of your covers. Is that a stylistic thing? That's genre based, or is it just a preference thing? Great episode again, and keep on doing it. said something nicer than that, but that's the gist. I have done a couple stack things. I did a little funk tune once. I had a stack. I have some splash cymbals. I have probably about 6 or 7 splash cymbals. I do stack them periodically. I've done China stacks. I have a 16-inch Peisty signature China that I've stacked on top of a 16-inch traditional or a 14-inch 505 hi-hat. I've had a tambourine on top of it. I've done some weird stacks, and you'll find them in some of my older videos, my real old videos from last year. I had some of these strange setups in there. But I do think it's genre-based, Steve, to be honest. I think the genre I'm playing, the rock genre I've been playing a lot of, it doesn't really, the stacks don't really fit. You know, it's more of a modern thing to do stacks. I do have some gospel-y kind of drumless tracks that I've kind of downloaded, and I plan on doing some covers of. And what I will try to do is put together some interesting stacks for those covers. Maybe an auxiliary hi-hat. I'll have 2 hi-hats and a stack and a couple other things. I also did a video on nasty Chinas and stacks and stuff. So if you want to look back in my videos about cymbals on Drum Talk, I did a whole episode on that topic. And I was playing the little jazz kit, and I had all kinds of crazy stuff that day. But the stack thing can be really cool, and there's guys that do it really well, and I say go for it. You know, I got kind of burnt out on the splash thing back in the 90s into the 2000s. I always had 2 splashes all the time. One here, sometimes 3. I was doing the Vinny thing, you know, trying to do the Stu Copeland, Sting vibe on everything. But it got old, you know, and it became wrong for a lot of the music I was playing. A lot of the church music went to big cymbals and 3 cymbals, not 5. I've just started to expand my cymbals again. Now that I got this China, I have a China up all the time. I love China cymbals. And this Peisty 2002 16-inch, I mean, I love that cymbal. I love that cymbal. So now I've got 3 crashes and a ride and a China and a set of hats. And there's really no place to stick the second hat. But I like playing 2 hats. I got enough hi-hats, I can play 2 hats. And occasionally I'll put an 11-inch splash, Peisty splash I have here. I only have 1 Peisty splash. But I have a Zildjian splash, I've got a couple Sabian splashes. I've got a whole bunch of Chinas. I've got everything from a Swish knocker, which is a 22-inch Zildjian Swish knocker with 20 rivets in it, to a 20-inch Wuhan. I've got this 18-inch Peisty China 2002. I've got a Tosco by Sabian 18-inch China that looks like a Zildjian because I took the logo off. It sounds awesome. It's one of my favorite Chinas. Peisty 16-inch signature China with some rivets in it. Those are my China cymbals. I've got like 5 China cymbals right now if I want to pull them out. I had a couple really broken. Actually, you know what I do when I do stacks? Sometimes I've got 2 broken Wuhans, a 12 and a 14, that are kind of chewed up, and I'll stack that on top of something. Really nasty stack sounds. But again, it's not my thing, but I may be trying some cool stuff, so I'll try to work that in for you, Steve, because I have done it before. It's just been a while. All right, and my last question. My last question comes from Todd Morrissey. He said, as a Gretsch guy, do you generally prefer die-cast hoops all around? I prefer die-cast for sure on the snare. I think I've become a believer on the toms too, thanks to Star Classics. Thoughts? Great question, Todd. I'm a big fan of die-cast hoops. Now, I would love to have a kit with triple flange hoops or the new 302 Gretsch hoops, just to get a different sound, because there's a difference between a triple flange and a die-cast hoop. I believe the great Gretsch sound is partially the Jasper shell and the round over edge, and also the die-cast hoops. The die-cast hoops focus the tom sound. That's the one thing I can tell you about die-cast hoops. They're very focused. They tune up really well, okay? As opposed to triple flange, which have a tendency to open the drum up in a different way. So it's a different sound. DW drums use triple flange on them. A lot of drums do. Ludwig drums do too. And I've played those drums. I've had those drums. But I seem to gravitate towards Gretsch, and I like the die-cast hoop sound. Now for snare drums, I like the die-cast hoop sound too. That's why I have it on my cast aluminum drum. It's on the Noble Cooley. It's on the 7-inch walnut drum. I even got it on the Black Magic. The 8-inch Black Magic's got it. Now some of those drums, every once in a while, I will put triple flange. I had the die cast on the Black Beauty 5x14 for a while. Sounded great. It had more of a Stu Copeland thing. Stu Copeland used to love to have that brass shell snare drum with die casts. That was one of his things he would do. And I think if you look at the Stu Copeland Tama drum, it's got die casts on it. Kenny Arnoff's another guy that has die casts on his brass drums. So brass drums with die casts do sound pretty cool. But if you've got a Black Beauty with triple flange, they also have a certain sound. It's got that, you know, it's got that Ludwig sound. That Ludwig Black Beauty 6.5x14 sound is that opened up triple flange sound. So they all have their place, but for toms, I love my Gretsch toms, and I love the way the die-cast hoops sound on them. For Star Classics, I think one of the reasons I like the Star drums and the Star Classics is because of the die-cast hoops, to be honest. I've played Tama Rock Stars, I've played Tama, got an itch, sorry about that, Mike Fasano. I always pick a mic for that. Didn't do the scratch, stayed out of the scratch today. But anyhow, I've played some of the Tama drums with the triple flange. They don't sound as good to me. But when they put the die cast on them, they open up. But I haven't played a set of Superstars in years, real old 80s Superstars. By the way, there are certain drums that I would love to have that are old vintage drums. You know, 60 set of Ludwigs, mahogany, or, you know, when they had the 3 plies with the reinforcing rings. Tama Superstars are on the list. Tama made birch drums that were Superstar drums in the 80s. They were amazing drums. Amazing, amazing drums. You know, of that vintage kind of era stuff. Beautiful drums. And a certain shell. Camco's another drum shell I'd like to get my hands on someday too. They were a thicker shell. Kind of more in the Rogers vein, I guess. Rogers had a thicker shell too. Actually, they all had thicker shells except Gretsch. Gretsch had that thin one. Anyhow, I don't know if I just got the show or I didn't get the show. I just had a phone call came in. This is the problem when you use the iPhone. I guess you should put it in airplane mode. I should have known better than to do that. Anyhow, that's the answer to the die-cast hoop question. I was just starting to ramble on. One more thing before I close, now that I'm going to have to kind of edit, and hopefully my Logic is running too, or otherwise I'll redo the whole show tomorrow. One more thing before I say my closing. Some of you have noticed and have mentioned the hater thing. Apparently I have now jumped into the range where I have haters. I don't want to acknowledge them, that's why I put it on the back end of the video. I just want to give you my philosophy on haters. First off, my philosophy on everybody is to treat everybody with respect and kindness. And even the people that don't like me, I try to say a nice comment back to them. I believe that's what I'm called to do by my faith, to do that. So I try to treat people nicely all the time. But you just can't do anything about people that don't like you for some reason. They might not like the way I look. I know some guys don't like the way I play. Maybe they don't like that I have stuff. Maybe they don't like the success of my channel. Maybe, I don't know. You know, YouTube's a funny place where you can say whatever you want and you're anonymous and you get away with it. All I have to say to the haters is, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about you and I don't. And it's a shame when guys just can't be nice. So I'm going to try to continue to be nice and answer questions. But I realize, one of the things I realize now in this new world is there are those that like you, there are those that don't like you, there are those that are jealous of you. You can't do anything about it. You just got to move on. So, as Ringo would say, peace, okay? Peace and love to all. Thank you for watching. Your questions make the show. Guys, think about what I talked about at the beginning. I'd love to have a couple questions submitted video-wise, and I'll sneak it into Ask Earl over the next couple weeks. Thanks for watching. Great show. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.